Okay, welcome to Chapter 4, Colonization and Conflict in the North, the New England and Middle Colonies. In this chapter, we are going to see how the experiences as well as the motivations for arrival differed in the North and Middle colonies from their southern counterparts. To begin with, we're going to talk about the founding of New England, but we have to go back even further than this. We have to look at what brought these people to the New World. And I think it's relevant to discuss how the Protestant Reformation played an important role in this. If you remember from last year's teaching, rather even 2 years ago, we looked at the Protestant Reformation and how it began in the 16th century, which kind of was a backlash against the Catholic Church. People wanting to do things their own way, I guess. And Europe became entrenched in religious warfare, and one of the byproducts of the Protestant Reformation was the separation, was the division of people now along religious lines. Rather than being one unified church, they were now divided into many churches. If you remember, Martin Luther had started this in Germany, but soon it had spread throughout all of Europe, including England. In short, people were now arguing about what to believe in. Some people wanted to stay Catholic, others wanted to become a variety of different Protestant faiths, and Protestantism kept splintering off into many different groups. You have Calvinists, Baptists, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, and so on. Some wanted to make society more man-centered, as it had been God-centered for so long throughout the Middle Ages, and people that were looking at the Enlightenment and saying we need to be more secular, more humanistic. Others wanted to make society even more religious. These people sometimes are referred to as Puritans. People were not just philosophizing about these ideas like we talked about, like John Locke and Voltaire, but these people were actually putting these things into practice, and sometimes violently. People died because of this. So once Columbus discovers this new continent, it created an opportunity for people to kind of start a new social experiment, to move to the New World. And, for example, the Pilgrims could come and start from scratch. They didn't have to be around any other people or deal with any other religions or faith or governments. They could just start from scratch, break away from the Church of England. What was the problem with the Church of England and England itself, according to these separatists, which they became known as? Well, they believed that society in England was very corrupt. And instead of hampering or slowing down that corruption, the government was actually promoting it. They wanted the people, the separatists wanted a Calvinistic style church. And let's step back for a second and look at what Calvinism is. Remember, Calvinism teaches that all men are sinful and we have no free will. We have no, we're predestined for either heaven or hell. And, this was an idea that had been adopted by many people in Europe. It gave comfort and meaning to life, that God was in control, God was sovereign, and God was going to choose what happened to you in your life. And so many people believe that God was directing all of this, and people did not have free will. One thing you could say that they all agreed on was that the Catholic Church was at the heart of all of this corruption, and they wanted to cleanse and purify all the remaining vestiges of the Catholic Church from the Church of England. Many of these people, these Congregationalists, Calvinists, separatists, whatever you want to call them, they looked at the Anglican Church and they saw Anglican priests wearing their Catholic vestments, people standing on altars with, praying with rosaries and having statues and incense and all of these things. They thought they were way too Catholic, and they didn't just focus enough on what should be the center of faith, and that is the Bible. However, they were stymied when it came to getting English monarchs to get rid of these Catholic traditions. Queen Elizabeth kind of went a middle way. allowing some Catholic practices to remain, but also allowing Protestantism to come in. She also was pretty um, tolerant of these separatists and Congregationalists who criticized the crown. She allowed them to have their say, whereas when James I, her cousin from Scotland, takes over, he is not tolerant. He does not tolerate dissension at all. And so his policy would be to rid England of these radicals. Many of them moved to Holland to try to get away from the persecution, the fines, the imprisonments, and even in a few cases, the executions of their members. Many of these people were not high up in society. And you'll usually find that the people that are complaining, the people that want change, are not the people that are doing very well. They're the people that are of humble means. They eventually were pushed out of England. Many of them moved to Holland in 1608, where the Dutch government permitted them to practice their own religion. But as time went on, they realized they did not like Holland. Holland was, I guess, too permissive, and as they wanted to change Holland too, so they couldn't exist there either. Plus, Holland was Holland; it was the Dutch, and they weren't English, and there was already something wrong in the eyes of the Puritans with them for that reason. These are the groups that Puritans consisted of: Presbyterians and Congregationalists, who, as I mentioned before, were very Calvinist in their beliefs. They did believe in that predestination that I mentioned. And they called for reform, and this is what's going to end up leading them to sail for America. They just realized that Europe was too corrupt for saving. The Church of England had fallen too deep and was too corrupt for them to change, and they had to just completely get out and restart a new society. And they look at Jamestown, and they see that Jamestown had been a successful new beginning, and so they decided that they were going to set sail for Jamestown. They had some financial backers in Europe that were trying to make some money, and so they sponsored this trip of the Puritans, who we refer to as pilgrims. These separatists were called pilgrims. Now, there's going to be another group of Puritans later on. I don't want you to confuse them because they end up in the same place, and the pilgrims kind of get adopted in with these other Puritans, but they're really two separate groups. These pilgrims established Plymouth Colony, which will later become part of Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1620, with the landing on Plymouth Rock and all of that good stuff. So 88 pilgrims make their way to the New World. They settle in Massachusetts and Plymouth Colony, and one of the most important and significant events of this was the signing and the creation of the Mayflower Compact, which we've already looked at this year, basically setting up a written constitution, the first written constitution in the New World, which calls for annual elections, representation of all the people, free men allowed to vote. So this is going to be a different type of government with based on Enlightenment ideas of the people having the power. Meanwhile, back in England, you have a new king, Charles I, son of James I, and he does not get along with Parliament any better than his father. In fact, he gets along with them a lot worse, and he wants to raise taxes, and they don't want to raise taxes, and he wants to raise fees and go to war, and they don't want to do any of those things. And so he basically just says, well, I don't need you anymore then, and he dissolves Parliament and rules without them, like a dictator. And he also moves at the same time against the Puritans, who he did not like their dissension either. And so he is fighting on two fronts, against the Puritans in the religious realm and against the Parliament, who also made a large number of people in Parliament were also Puritans. So they did not like him at all. And with this ongoing struggle, many Puritans decide that it's time for them to leave. It's time for them to get out. They can't deal with this king anymore. They can't deal with the way the Church of England is being run, and they believe that the best way to fix the problems is to get away from the situation and try to save the church from outside rather than trying to be in the whole corrupt situation. The second group, or second wave of Puritans to head to the New World in 1629 under the Massachusetts Bay Company Charter was a lot different. They had a charter. They had wealthy individuals. They had a sense of mission in the New World. They were not abandoning the church. They were not turning their back on the church. In fact, they were trying to regroup and refocus and redouble efforts on trying to save the church. And so the company's first governor, John Winthrop, he is a common sense kind of guy. He organizes the colony. They have the land distributed, and people are set up in their situation. These are much wealthier, better off Englishmen that come to the New World in this second wave than the previous ones, who almost starved to death, who had very little support from the outside and only managed to survive like a quarter of their members, and that was with great help from the natives who lived there. Their form of government was very similar to that of Plymouth. They had a charter which provided for annual elections of the governor. His assistants were the stockholders in the company. They were also freemen. They created a large, broad appeal government that all the freemen had a say in. And Winthrop and his assistants went on to expand the number of freemen in 1631 to basically include every adult male church member. So you didn't even have to be a property owner, which was radically new. In this idea that as long as you were a church member and an adult male, you had the right to vote and participate in government. Again, because they were from a situation where in Europe you have this social hierarchy with the nobility and very wealthy at the top, followed by the middle class and poor. There really wasn't this distinction like there was in um, Europe, and so they brought this new social order, this new economic order to New England as well. And these are kind of how the social order lines up. You have the local gentry, prominent pious families, upstanding citizens, a large population of independent yeomen who were landowners loyal to the local community, who may not have been from important families or top church members, but were powerful nonetheless because of their local community ties. And then, of course, at the bottom of society, you have the small population of landless laborers, servants, poor, maybe even eventually some slaves. Between 1630 and 1640, over 16,000 immigrated to the Americas. And they came to Boston, they came to Salem, they came to all sorts of different places in Massachusetts. And unlike those in Jamestown, they came as family units. So rather than just having a whole bunch of men coming over and trying to find their fortune, you get a large number of families starting lives in the New World. So that's a big difference between New England and southern colonies. The area is generally healthy. Again, contrast that with the South in Jamestown and different parts of Virginia and Massachusetts or Maryland and some of the other Georgia and some of those other colonies. It was very unhealthy there with the swamps and the mosquitoes and the dysentery. In the northern colonies, like Massachusetts, the area was generally healthy. Puritans basically in the beginning must sacrifice the self-interest for the good of the community, or it would have fallen apart. Like struggles they had in Jamestown, they were not as present in the New England colonies because of this sense of we're all in this together. We're all for establishing this religious city on a hill. Puritans established Congregationalism, which is basically a state-supported system in which the congregation is independently governed by local church members. So rather than having one person in charge, you have a group of people in charge. And again, there's the idea that the Puritan civil government permits voting by all adult male church members. So it's a switch from where in the past you had to own property. Elected officials not concerned with themselves, rather than they were concerned with voter interest because they were elected every year, and people, if they weren't doing what the voters wanted, they would be voted out of office.